Hello and welcome to the interview. For decades, the US and Saudi Arabia have been locked in a somewhat unusual alliance, a liberal democracy working with an ultra-conservative monarchy that isn't known for promoting political and religious freedoms. But both countries needed to ensure a steady flow of oil, and since 1979, to contain the Islamic Republic of Iran. But the foundations of that alliance are now being shaken. America is producing more of its own oil and gas thanks to technological innovations. And both Washington and Tehran seem to be looking for a fresh start, much to Riyadh's consternation. All this playing heavily on US President Barack Obama as he visits the kingdom. Well, to discuss the ramifications of this trip, I'm joined by Judith Kirper, Director of Middle East Programs at the Institute of World Affairs in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the interview. How would you evaluate the US-Saudi relationship as it stands now?
Well, this is an historic relationship. It's endured for more than 70 years through the reign of the Shah in Iran, through the Islamic Revolution up until today. In the past, we've had many, many strains and always worked them out. And I think that whatever strains exist today will also be worked out. I think that there's a little more public scrutiny because of multimedia and also because some Saudi princes have done some interviews and so on. But I think that the relationship is basically permanent and is healthy enough to withstand any stress that may come to it.
But don't you think there's a new trend here which is going to make a big difference, and that is the US moving towards energy independence? I mean, surely that does create a very different dynamic over the next 10, 20 years.
Obviously, for the United States, we won't be as dependent on oil from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf as we have been in the past. But for the foreseeable future, the entire global economy is going to depend on fossil fuel, and much of it is coming from, most of it, in fact, comes from the Gulf. So I don't think the importance of Saudi Arabia as the key oil producer is going to change very much. What has changed is that there is an opening with Iran. There is the Arab Spring, which is a monumental, historic change in the region, which has already and will continue to affect every single state in the region, even those that don't have any uprisings. So the entire environment, global environment, is very stressful at the moment, and certainly Saudi is concerned about it.
Do you see the Saudis trying to find a new path in the region that is slightly more independent from the US?
I think that they would like to, but I'm not sure that it's possible. The US and Saudi have never had perfect agreement on regional issues. There have always been outstanding issues, and the Saudis have differences with US policy and vice versa. I don't think that that their policy can or will be more independent. I think what they are craving and what they have asked for and what they deserve over many, many years is more consultation and not to be taken for granted. Since the end of the Cold War, when the threat was a Soviet threat, I don't think that the U.S. has paid attention to the content of the U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship. And that's a very, very important issue. What, in fact, in this 21st century is the content of the relationship? What's the U.S. prepared to do for the Saudis, and what are the Saudis prepared to do for and with the United States? So a real dialogue of substance is required.
What do you think that dialogue could look like? I mean, what could they actually come up with?
Well, the U.S. obviously has to reiterate frequently to assure the Saudis that we are committed to their security. The U.S. has two special relationships in the region, and we have had for some 70 years with the Saudis and some 60-something years with the Israelis. And we are prepared to protect their security up to and including the use of force. But that's not enough, because threats to Saudi Arabia are not military threats. And so we need to have a dialogue about how we can help the Saudis with internal reform. They have 80,000 students in the United States studying in universities. How to help them to have reforms, economic reforms that will produce jobs during a time of what is a real crisis inside Saudi Arabia, as well as a transition from a king who is beloved but extremely old and will pass from the scene at some point. And that is always a shift that needs to be watched carefully.
But do you think the Saudis would really welcome that kind of deep American intervention, in a sense, in those domestic issues?
It always depends how it's done. I don't think that it should be looked at as intervention, but as two allied countries that are working together to keep stability in the Gulf and to help Saudis and other countries to move forward in ways that are going to be beneficial to their own society. Consultation, hand-holding, respect, understanding of the culture is extremely, extremely important in Saudi Arabia, maybe more so than in other countries in the region. And I think that the U.S. has really taken the Saudis for granted more than is wise in terms of American interests in the region. We need to pay attention.
If the U.S. wants to change that, though, I mean, who exactly should it talk to? Because there's a lot of turbulence in the House of Saud, and perhaps there's an argument also for the U.S. to reach out to other sectors in Saudi Arabia, because, as you mentioned, there's this very big young population, a growing young population, and the people at the top are 80 or 90 years old.
Well, the king is, yes, he's probably 92, and the crown prince, the first crown prince, is old also. But there are a lot of people to talk to. The Saudi private sector non-royals are extremely dynamic. They all speak English, U.S. educated, travel to Europe, the U.S., and so on, and they play a very important role. In addition, the grandsons of the founder are going to take over fairly soon in our lifetime, maybe in 10 years. And they are much better, these young princes are much, much better educated. Most speak English, have been educated in the West. And it's very easy. I know many of them. It's very easy to know them, to talk to them. So there's no lack of people to talk to in Saudi Arabia, in addition to the king and his advisors and obviously the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Economy, Intelligence, and so on. Those relationships are very, very solid. And the U.S. has daily contact with most of those ministers. It's not something that we necessarily hear about in public. It's become very routine, but it's a very, very close relationship.
So should the U.S. focus on economic reforms and helping young Saudis, and perhaps stay away from the more touchy issues to do with democracy and human rights? I mean, one example would be the recent crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia. Is that something that the U.S. can afford not to raise in the context of the Arab Spring, or should it, in fact, pursue that somehow?
I think the U.S. has to raise all the issues that are important for U.S. interests, but they have to be raised in private, and they have to be raised with sensitivity in a cultural context that the Saudis will be able to hear what the Americans and others who speak to them are saying. It's extremely, extremely important that the private dialogue remains private because Saudis are very conservative. They're very shy. They don't like things to go in public. They'd like people to understand them, but they don't really know how to help outsiders to know them better. So being very, very conscious of what kind of communication will be effective is very important for Americans and other Westerners, for the French and the British, others who have a constant dialogue with the Saudis.
And in a nutshell, just to wrap this all up, what do you think Saudi Arabia can offer the US right now?
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia is, with Egypt out of the picture, Saudi Arabia has become the leader in the Arab world. The king is also the moral authority in the Islamic world. They have very good, they have good intelligence. They have a lot of money to help with humanitarian problems such as Syria. And the partnership with the U.S. makes the Saudis very, very powerful. So that needs to be part of the dialogue. There are many, many avenues of cooperation, very close cooperation. And where we disagree, we just disagree and have to leave those things aside.
Okay, so obviously a need for a rethink on both sides. We'll have to end it there. Thank you so much, Judith Kipper, Director of Middle East Programs at the Institute of World Affairs, joining me from Washington, D.C. That's all for this edition of The Interview here on France 24.